Welcome everyone to Color Commentary. We're Pauper commentators Michael Pedrick and Adrian Guarzales. How's it going, Adrian?
Good.
Good. Glad to hear that.
It's going pretty well.
Getting excited for your trip to Japan in the not too distant future?
Yeah, it's 100% happening. I'm going to go play Pauper in Okinawa. It's going to be great.
It's going to be real good. It'll put all those hours of watching your animus to use.
Wow, dude, could you be any more culturally insensitive?
Yeah, probably could given current events, but
yeah, you definitely could. That was facetious. Of course you could be.
All right, so you're going and doing that. Let's take care of the upkeep first, and then we can get into our discussion topics for today. First off, this show is brought to you in part by Original Magic Art. Original Magic Art is a super cool website, and in their store, they have a variety of playmats, dice bags, tokens, and well, not original art, but prints of art. And they produce really quality products. They have magic art stuff. They have art history art stuff. It's all really high quality. It's made by people who actually care about what they're doing, not just trying to make a quick buck. But we have an affiliateship with them. If you if you go to buy something and use the code on checkout, commentary, all caps, spelled exactly as it is in the name of this podcast, you will get 5% off, and we will get a little bit of a kickback. So you're getting something, we're getting something. Everyone is happy. Definitely go check them out. Adrian, what have you got for us this week?
Well, if you don't want to support Josh for some crazy reason, you can always subscribe to us on Patreon. For just $1 an episode, you can hear the full show. We got a pre-show and a post-show, and you get access to our patron-exclusive Discord, which is always hopping.
Always. Constantly.
Always. Constantly hopping.
All right. And yeah, definitely check that out. If you want to throw a couple bucks our way, it's the most efficient way to do so. All right. So this week, did you got any neat updates for us from F&M or anything like that?
I went 0-4 at F&M.
What?
I got a bye, so I guess I went 1-3. Yeah, I did so bad. But the good news is our F&M is better than it has been in a long, long time. We had 9 players, 4 rounds. It was super sweet. A lot of fun decks, diverse metagame. I was going to play Mono Black, then I wussed out and played Affinity at the last minute. I got round 1, I got paired against Turbo Fog, which I actually don't think is a bad matchup. I think he got game 1, I think. I got game 2 because I had sideboard cards. And then game 3, he milled both my Pyroblasts and my Enchantment Destruction spell. So I wasn't able to win, and it was awful.
What variant of Turbo Fog are we talking here? Are we talking Simic or the full band?
Simic. It was the one that we talked about with Will. Oh,
way back. A little bit of a throwback for fans who've been listening for a long time, or people who have made the ill-advised decision to listen to old episodes. All right. So that's neat. It's a bummer that you went 1-3, but Affinity just not what it used to be.
Yeah, it happens. I don't know. Yeah, it just wasn't that great.
All right. The other thing that I want to address, and this is something that, if you have any sort of social media and, pay attention to Magic things, you will no doubt have heard of, this whole business with Christine Sprankle, the cosplayer, who has publicly announced that she intends no longer to do any sort of cosplay stuff for Magic. And this is as a result of, serial harassment on the internet. And, I really just wanted to get out in front of this as much as I could and say, just this is a hobby that we share in common. And I want people to go away from this podcast, and if there's anything you take out of it, I really want you to go out there and try and make this a hobby that anyone can and would want to engage with. You can't make someone love this hobby, but you sure as hell can make someone hate it, and just don't be that person. Try your absolute best to encourage people. You know, we've had episodes on here about community building. We've, you know, talked about and addressed people's concerns of how do I get Pauper started in my area. And I truly think that some of my best and longest lasting friends I've met through this game. And don't be the person who causes someone to leave this game. Try and avoid sort of this toxic mentality that is all too common in Magic, and try and make your local shop and the online community a better place. You know, don't make it your goal to make other people have a terrible time, and the world will be a better place for it. And now, with all that seriousness taken, you know, the wind out of our sails, let's
here.
Let's get into
Mike,
it.
Yeah, we care. Okay, we're talking about today. Oh my God.
We're talking about Abzan Tordax. We're going from people being garbage on the internet to some hot steamy jank. So this deck is back. And
it's certainly been a minute, for better or for worse. It's been a minute.
It has been a minute, and Tordax, you know, has not had the easiest time because it is sort of a slower mid-range deck that generally cares about resolving a handful of spells over all others and going from there. And the version we're looking at today is very, very, very toolboxy, and it's, you know, we're not going to do as deep a dive on this list as we possibly could because we have another episode covering Tordax. It's called the County Medical Examiners. You can find it in the back episodes. Highly recommend going and listening to that. It was a patron suggested episode. It was all about Tordax, all about this one niche archetype. And I think the best place to start with this deck would just be looking at Tortured Existence. Tortured Existence is an enchantment for 1 black mana, and it has an activated ability, 1 black mana, discard a creature card from your hand, return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And this is the linchpin of this deck. So Adrian, what sort of effects pair well with this?
Anything that wants to enter the battlefield is pretty good, and any creatures who you can sacrifice are fairly good. Also very, very strong with Madness, which is maybe what you were really going for with that question.
Madness and Dredge. Like, Dredge is one of those mechanics that, you know, Mark Rosewater has said on multiple occasions was a mistake in the way that they set it up. For those not aware, Dredge is an ability that is templated as Dredge and then a number. And what Dredge says is, anytime you would draw a card, you may instead choose to dredge this card out of the graveyard and basically mill cards off the top of your library equal to the dredge number. So it's only with Dredge 3, whenever you would draw a card, you then have an option instead to put the top 3 cards of your library into the graveyard and put that card back in your hand. So this deck plays creatures with Dredge, so that way it can always have something, or hopefully always have something to discard out of its hand. Now this list, I'm looking down it, and there are 26 creatures, and normally when you see something like 26 creatures, you're expecting what? Like maybe 8 different cards. This one clocks in at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 different creatures.
It's a lot of creatures. You got to discard them, though. It's cool. Yeah,
this is super toolboxy.
There are some interactions that I'm sure we'll go through that I do like. It's interesting. I don't know if it needs to be Abzan. Yeah, in fact, I think it definitely does not need to be Abzan. Well, on the sideboard. But
well, let's get into it a little bit. So I kind of want to cover the spells first to get those out of the way, because those kind of they all sort of serve a goal in common. So we've got the 4 copies of Tortured Existence. We then have 3 copies of Vessel of Nascency, which is a green for an enchantment. And what you can do is, while it's on the battlefield, you can pay 1 and a green, sacrifice it, reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Then you can put an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker, not dreadfully relevant to us, from among them into your hand, put the rest into your graveyard. So this deck always kind of prefers these sorts of draw effects where you're not just drawing a mass of cards, but you're saying, I'm going to look at this many cards and then the rest are going to go into my graveyard. It also runs 4 copies of Commune of the Gods, which is 1 and a green for a sorcery. Reveal the top 5 of your library, and you can put a creature or enchantment from among them into your hand. Rest go to the graveyard. So, as I'm sure the viewers at home have already figured out, these both have in common the fact that they can pick up enchantments. And I do really want to hammer home this deck doesn't do what it does as powerfully as it can without Tortured Existence.
Yeah, it's pretty important.
Yeah. And then rounding out our spells, we've got 1 copy of Gnaw to the Bone, and this card is just downright silly sometimes. So Gnaw to the Bone is 2 and a green for an instant, gain 2 life for each creature card in your graveyard, and then it flashes back for the same amount. Have you ever had to play against this out of Tortured?
Yeah, dude, it's super duper annoying.
This is, in my opinion, probably one of their most backbreaking cards they have accessible to them because, you know, it just helps them stabilize so well. And the fact that they're already milling stuff off the top of their library, even if you hit this, it's not one of those situations, you know, like if your opponent is milling you and you don't have any graveyard strategy. For example, your Friday night experience, you didn't have any way to get back the cards that got milled that mattered. With this, not only is milling your game, self-milling your game plan, you have a card that lets you stabilize that doesn't care if it gets milled. This is just very, very powerful. And if they draw it and they get to snap it off twice against you, I've had someone gain 40 life against me with this card. Didn't feel
it's
good.
Pretty annoying. No.
All right. So those are sort of our backbone of the deck. We got Gnaw to the Bone to stabilize. We got Commune and Vessel to dig to try and get to your Tortured Existences. And obviously Tortured Existence is the engine. And how it fills out with the rest of the cards, sort of, there's been a lot of different builds of this deck over the years, and the real core of the deck is, you know, your 4 Tortured Existence. And if you're playing green, the rest of these cards are pretty stock, but then you start getting into the creatures. And we'll start things off at the top. 1 copy Carrion Feeder. It's black for a 1/1, can't block, and you can sack other creatures to put +1/+1 counters on it. And you had mentioned earlier the creatures that can sacrifice themselves. How do you feel about like these aristocrat style cards in these sorts of lists?
I think it's okay because you can sacrifice the creature to the Carrion Feeder if it's going to die, or if you want to swing for more damage. Then you can return it back to your hand. Then you could play it as a sorcery, and then you can sacrifice it again. So, you know, and a card like Fume Spitter specifically lets you, do it pretty cheaply. I also want to point out that there's a Mesmeric Fiend in the list, which I think combos very well with Carrion Feeder, because if Mesmeric Fiend leaves the battlefield trigger on the stack, you just get rid of the thing forever, right?
Yeah, so Mesmeric Fiend is 1 and a black for a 1/1. And I'm going to read the exact card because this is important, because newer players may be familiar with stuff like I'm trying to think of one of these, Banishing Light, which have similar effects to this, but there's a key difference here. So Mesmeric Fiend says, when it enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals their hand, you choose a non-land card from it and exile it. And then it has a separate ability that says, when Mesmeric Fiend leaves the battlefield, return the removed card to its owner's hand. And because these are templated as separate abilities, if the Mesmeric Fiend dies before the first trigger resolves, the enters the battlefield trigger, it'll try to return something, it'll see that there's nothing there, and then it will resolve the exiling. So I guess that's true. Like, it does let this become a castigate that's potentially better.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say, like that's one of the examples that I can think of where it might be good. Is that like overall a very strong effect? I'm not sure.
I could also see, since it's got dredge creatures in here, I could see you potentially sacrifice, if one of these winds up on the battlefield, sacrificing it just so you can dredge it back to fill up your graveyard or to get a creature in your hand. So that way you can get something back with Tortured Existence. I think there is play here with Carrion Feeder. You mentioned Fume Spitter. There's one copy of it. It's a black for a 1/1. You can sacrifice it to put a -1/-1 counter on a creature. This, if you can loop this reliably, becomes a very good way to deal with either a lot of small things or one big thing. Does not do so well with lots of big things. This is not, super great against Affinity, for example. Next up, we've got 4 copies of Spore Frog, and Spore Frog is 1 green for a 1/1. Sacrifice it, prevent all combat damage that will be dealt this turn. Adrian, what do you think about 4 of these things main deck?
Dude, again, super duper obnoxious. It's basically trying to leverage these in order to beat like other creature decks. I don't know if it would do so well against Tron, because I think Tron is a really good game against most mid-range decks, but especially one that runs 4 copies of Spore Frog. But if you're playing like any kind of creature-based deck, Spore Frog can get real annoying real fast.
Yeah, one of these with a active Tortured Existence can, provide a soft lock. It never quite locks the opponent out of the game, just by the nature of, if your opponent has, say, a lightning bolt or another instant speed way to interact with it, they can kill it on your end step, then go to their turn and not have to worry about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Notably, this card has been rising pretty steadily in paper. It is one of the more expensive bits of this deck, which is kind of shocking to me. But I think this kind of represents the same thing that when we see the Moments piece showing up in Dinrovatron, it just buys you time so that you can set up your actual game plan against decks like Stompy.
Yeah.
Next up, we've got 1 copy Core Skyfisher, 1 in a white for a 2/3 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, return a permanent you control to its owner's hand.
And this one is weird. There's not really a lot of ETB creatures in this deck. I mean, there are a few, but enough to run Core Skyfisher?
Well, I'd like to touch on one in particular, and that's Oromancer, which is 2 in a white for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, you may return target enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. And this sort of provides, an extra copy of Tortured Existence. And then if it dies, you get it back with Tortured Existence, and you can kind of protect your main game plan. Obviously, still not great against counterspell heavy decks, but I could see, Core Skyfisher bounce my Oromancer back, Oromancer get back a Tortured Existence as a line of play.
Sure. This deck is here to grind.
Oh, yeah. We already covered Mesmeric Fiend. We've got 2 copies of Satyr Wayfinder, 1 in a green for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them into your hand, put the rest into your graveyard. So again, more of this self-mill to dig to specific cards.
And you can bounce that. That's value.
Yeah, you can also recycle it with Tortured Existence if you really need to. Not one of the most high value plays, but certainly has its place. We've got 3 copies of Crypt Rats, which is 2 in a black for a 1/1 with X, deals X damage to each creature, each player. Spend only black mana on this ability. This is a great way to, if you Spore Frog for a couple turns against Stompy, to kind of clear out the board a little bit and maybe not have to loop Spore Frog every turn. Does also give the deck a good chunk of reach in terms of just being able to turn into a fireball as well.
Yeah. And like you said, stabilize. This deck's all about delaying the game until they can get to a board advantage position where they can win.
Yeah. Next up, we've got Golgari Brownscare, and this is the first of our dredgers. This is 1 green for a 2/3 lizard, and it has dredge 2. So you can always, if this is in your graveyard, you can opt to not draw a card and instead return this thing to your hand. And it notably has the piece of text, when it's put into your hand from your graveyard, gain 2 life. And this is obviously meant to interact with its own ability, but it does trigger when you use Tortured Existence to get this thing back. And Adrian, do you want to tell our viewers at home who may not have played against this one of the most annoying things you can do with this?
Yeah, dude, cycling 2 Golgari Brown scales.
It is frankly,
just
super
discard a
annoying.
Golgari Brown scale, get gain 2 life, do it again, do it all on your end step. Yeah, it's super obnoxious. This deck has a lot of obnoxious things that go on in it. Mike and I are really big fans of this deck, and I think we'll explain why in a little bit. But
yeah. With looping the brown scale, once you have one in your hand and one in the graveyard, it allows you to, at your opponent's end step, however much black mana you have untapped, you're gaining twice that much life. And that combined with Gnaw to the Bone just lets you really aggressively dirtle with this deck.
Aggressive dirtling.
Yeah. Next up, we got one copy Stinkweed Imp. Stinkweed Imp is pretty common in a lot of dredge lists and other formats as well. It's 2 and a black for a 1/2 with flying. And when it deals combat damage to a creature, destroy that creature. Notably, this is not Death Touch. It's only combat damage, and it is a triggered ability. But it does have Dredge 5 stapled onto it. So this does flip a lot of stuff into the bin. What do you think about having this as a singleton? A single copy.
It's interesting. Certainly, it has less utility than Golgari Brown Scale, but it's just such a good blocker that I'm really not sure. I guess this.
Well, so my big thing is, I remember there was an era when these types of decks would play more copies of this, and I think, from what I remember in that period, was, you kind of always ran the risk of dredging this back a couple times and then realizing, oh God, I'm actually running out of cards and I'm not presenting a real clock here. So I think maybe part of what helped this deck get to a 5-0 was the fact that it's not leaning so heavily on the dredgers and is instead, trying to be more of a mid-range deck. It's not trying to, just dump its entire deck into the bin as quickly as possible. Next up, we've got one copy Tilling Tree Folk, which is 2 and a green for a 1/3. When it enters the battlefield, return up to 2 land cards from your graveyard to your hand. And this, I guess this is kind of protection against you milling lands when you need them. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this, Adrian?
I have many. Sorry, just taking a drink there. Someone were to invent a Jund Land style list, then maybe it'd have a real home. I think it's fine. I think that's very valid. Milling lands. Not all of your cards find lands, and we also have some. Well, we have one utility land. It looks like. But we do have 4 copies of Ash Barrens, which is, definitely something to think about if you get back a couple Ash Barrens and then maybe another land card you had to discard earlier in the game and you use it to fuel, just finding some more lands and getting them out, getting more access to black mana. I honestly don't hate it. It's pretty spicy, if you know what I mean. But I don't hate it.
Yeah, I think this is something that feels good as a one of, just because it's not always going to be relevant. So sort of lowering your odds of drawing it every single game is something that I like here.
And then if you draw it and don't need it, if you have out a Tortured Existence, you can just pitch it and get something else instead. So I do like that. I think that's why this deck gets away with so many one-ofs. All
right, now we've got, you mentioned Madness earlier. We've got 3 copies of Grave Scrabbler. Grave Scrabbler is 3 and a black for a 2/2. That's all it does, unless you pay its Madness cost. Now, Madness is when you discard this card from your hand, it goes temporarily into exile. You get the option to pay its Madness cost and cast it, or let it just go to the graveyard. And in this case, the Madness cost is 1 and a black. And if you cast it for its Madness cost, you get to return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So the optimal play here is you take this thing, you pitch it to Tortured Existence, cast it for its Madness cost, and then get back 2 things out of your graveyard, and you have a 2/2, all for 3 mana. So you've basically done the best Wander in Death impression you possibly can. What's your feeling on this in this list?
I think Grave Scrabbler is kind of a necessary evil. It's a lot of quote unquote value to not actually have to discard anything, and then you get a thing out of your graveyard back. Like, it is pretty sweet. Otherwise pretty unimpressive. It's really only good when you have out Tortured Existence. I don't think this deck has another way of discarding it.
absolutely doesn't. So moving on from this little gremlin man, we've got 2 copies of Gurmag Angler, the big fish, the 6 and a black for a 5/5 with delve. What do you feel about delving away your graveyard in a deck that really cares about having access to certain cards in its graveyard?
I'm not sure. I kind of wish it was Horror of the Broken Lands. I was thinking about that earlier. It's like probably fine because it ends the game really quick, but I still think Horror might be a little bit better because I don't like delving away my graveyard. But, I'm also not a big Tordex player, so maybe I'm just absolutely wrong.
Well, so Horror, for those playing along at home, is 4 and a black for a, oh God, I've goofed up by not having this prepared here. But Horror of the Broken Lands. Horror of the Broken Lands is 4 and a black for a 4/4. Whenever you cycle or discard a card, it gets +2/+1 until end of turn, and it cycles for a black. So I guess maybe could you do a bit of a deeper delve on why you'd like this here?
Well, you're constantly discarding cards. So with Tortured Existence, you could use it the same way you use Golgari Brown Scale, where you just pump it up a whole bunch just by using the discard ability on Tordex. We also have a couple cycle cards that we haven't really talked about too much yet. Well, really just the one, I guess. But then that could also open you up to playing some cycle lands in the list, which it doesn't currently. And then I think then you might even have more of an excuse to play Tilling Treefolk to get back your cycle lands. So I think Horror of the Broken Lands might be a little bit more on theme, but Gurmag Angler might just end up being just the better threat.
Yeah, Horror of the Broken Lands, certainly. I can see that, like, the threat of activation on this thing is massive. Like, I can't, if your opponent has an active Tordex and this thing out and they have black mana untapped, I think you have to block this just by default. And it doesn't take much for this thing to grow bigger than a lot of things it's going to be running into. So best case scenario, you're chumping this with like a token or something, and worst case scenario, this is just an abyss. So I kind of like that, but I can't imagine that Gurmag Angler, as you said, might just be the better card. It might just be that, the dumb 5/5 that costs 1 black might just be better here. Now rounding out the list is one of the largest pigs, as someone will no doubt point out. There is a bigger pig in Pauper now, but it's Krosan Tusker, which is 5 green for a 6/5 boar beast, and it has cycling 2 and a green. And it says when you cycle Krosan Tusker, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle your library. How do you feel about this in a deck that has 4 Ash Barrens and only 9 basics? It feels a little tight.
Yeah, and I guess there's only one. You can always deploy it as a threat, and you get to bring it back with Tordex, right? Like you can discard it and then bring it back to your hand and then cycle it again. That's kind of neat. But again, I think what
you can do with this. You can cycle it, and instead of drawing a card, you can dredge something. So it can act like a very funky version of Tordex for 1 use.
Yeah, that's true. I hadn't really thought of that.
Now, it is worth pointing out, like, you can just get this thing back with Tordex and just cycle it, even if you have no targets left. Like, you can just use this as a very, very expensive, what is that? Reach Through Mists? Or the
Peer Through Depths?
No. Reach Through Mists. The one that's just blue, draw a card. But I don't know. Krosan Tusker, I think the 6/5 body is certainly appealing. We're seeing less Gurmag Anglers nowadays, so it's not as much of a downside that it's not a 6/6, but I don't know. I feel like this is perhaps not quite optimal, but I'd be willing to be wrong on this one.
So wrong.
So getting into those lands. So 4 Ash Barrens, the thing that cycles for basics, 1 Bojuka Bog, 4 forests, 2 Golgari Rot Farms, the black-green Karoo or Bounce Land, 3 Jungle Hollows, the black-green Gain Land, one copy of Orzhov Basilica, the black-white bounce land, 1 plains, 2 Scoured Barrens, the black-white gain land, and 4 swamps. This certainly is a land base. Seeing all those bounce lands, even though it's only 3 of them, I'm kind of liking your idea of playing a handful of cyclers in here.
Yeah, the bounce lands make that even more appealing because you can just tap the mana, bounce back, cycle it. That's card advantage, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. Moving into the sideboard, because as we've already noticed, like there's a lot of 1-ofs in here. The sideboard is more of the same. So we've got 2 copies of Caustic Caterpillar, which is a green for a 1/1. 1 and a green, sacrifice it, destroy an artifact or enchantment. I'm imagining this puts in work against something like Affinity. Am I right?
Yeah, it's not the best, but once they get the lock going, it's pretty rough.
And I guess this even might have some amount of play against hands out of Boros decks, just because it can crimp their mana both by cutting off artifact lands and cutting off prisms.
Yeah, when you destroy their card draw artifacts, you can really hurt them.
Yeah. Next up, we have 2 Deadweight. It's 1 black for an enchantment aura. Enchanted creature with -2/-2. Synergizes with Auramancer as a repeatable form of removal. It is the slowest version of Punishing Fire, but that sort of recursion can be useful, especially if these games are getting grindy, which you hope they are. 1 copy Fume Spitter, 1 copy Raven's Crime. Now this is a spicy little include. So Raven's Crime is 1 black sorcery. Target player discards a card with a retrace, and you can play this card from your graveyard by discarding a land in addition to paying its other costs. What do you think about this one?
I actually really like Raven's Crime. I think it's a really good card.
Well,
I think it's
specifically in this list, like that
with the Tilling Treefolk.
Yeah, I was gonna say Tilling Treefolk in this, like that's I can imagine a turn where you have access to 5 mana and you just go Tilling Treefolk, double Raven's Crime you. It's not the most efficient, but that could be very scary in some situations. Next we have a copy of Circle of Protection Green and 2 copies of Circle of Protection Red. Obviously, this deck is very teched against aggro decks. 1 copy Lone Missionary, which is 1 and a white for a 2/1 that gains you 4 life when it enters the battlefield. More sort of hedging against these aggro decks. 1 Auramancer in the board. 2 copies Fairy Macabre, which is 1 black for a 2/2 with flying, but you really care about the fact that you can discard it to exile up to 2 cards from graveyards. I actually never realized that Fairy Macabre let you exile stuff from multiple graveyards. That's kind of neat.
I don't think I knew that either. That's pretty cool.
1 copy of Gnawed to the Bone on the board, and then rounding things out is 1 copy of Wickerbough Elder, which is 3 and a green for a 4/4. Comes into play with a -1/-1 counter on it, and for 1 green, you can remove a -1/-1 counter from it to destroy target artifact or enchantment. And Adrian, do you want to inform viewers at home what this synergizes with in this deck?
Yes, Fume Spitter. You can keep reloading those -1/-1 counters on there. It just says remove a -1/-1 counter. Doesn't matter where it came from.
Now, my big question here is Wickerbough Elder actually necessary with the Caustic Caterpillars in there? Because
probably not.
Caustic Caterpillar, the downside is it doesn't provide an actual aggressive threat when you're done using it. But it's also 1 mana, so you play it out turn 1, turn 2 you can pop it, and I don't know. To me, Caustic Caterpillar, I guess it doesn't provide like that clock, because Wickerbough Elder is a 4/4 with a disenchant that happens to be stapled onto it. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think you really need both. I mean, Caustic Caterpillar is a 2-card thing. Like, because you have it in Tor deck. Wickerbough Elder is a 3-card thing because you have to also have the Fume Spitter. So I'm honestly not sure. Yeah. It closes out games a lot faster. It's a 4/4 when all is said and done. So
and we did talk about how this deck can sometimes struggle to sort of close out a game. So I think that aspect of it is beneficial. And just for the fans at home, this deck online is going to run you about $30, and in paper it's going to run you 33. And in paper,
it's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, that's not bad. In paper, your expensive parts are going to be your Spore Frogs and your Ash Barons, and then online, it's going to be Spore Frogs, Crypt Rats, and Ash Barons. Spore Frog is from a super underopened set, and it's very bad to draft online, so it's kind of pricey. And Ash Barons is always going to be expensive until they reprint it.
It's from Prophecy.
Yup, dreaded Masks block draft. Just not a very good format. So this list, what are your thoughts on it? Because you had said at one point, I forget if it was in the pre-show or not, but you didn't think this needed to be Abzan. Has walking through this potentially changed your mind on that?
I think Circle Protection is certainly powerful enough for the splash. I think a singleton Oromancer and a singleton Core Skyfisher are just kind of strange, especially when you consider how we've made the mana base. I guess we're running 2 Scoured Barons, a Plains, and an Orzhov Basilica. So I it's really for these sideboard cards. The 2 Cop Reds are probably there because it might struggle against Burn. Cop Green probably, for Stompy, and then Lone Missionary for both of them. So it is really teching hard for aggro, like you said. But honestly, now that I think of it, I'm not sure that those are this deck's bad matchups. I think it struggles a lot more against, like I mentioned earlier, Tron.
Yeah, stuff that just goes over the top of it. Now, I do also want to point out that one of the catches of splashing this heavily in this format particularly is, there's a lot of come into play tapped lands. We're looking at 9 out of a total 22 that don't come in tapped. I mean, I guess Ash Barons doesn't come in tapped, but it also doesn't provide colored mana. So trade-offs, but I don't know. There is a real cost to playing multiple colors in this format. And sure, you can say, oh, well, in Legacy, you can get Price of Progress or Blood Moon. And it's sure, but this deck is going to be playing a turn behind a lot of the time. And if it goes tap land into bounce land, it's going to be playing 2 turns behind. I think the white splash is good, but I could also see sort of a version of this that trims the white for more green options. I don't know. I am by no means a master of this deck, but the reason we're talking about this today is A, it's been a while since we've seen our buddy Tordex, but B, we wanted to talk about midrange. And Adrian, what is a midrange deck?
Quit putting me on the spot, dude. I'm kidding. Midrange is this weird middle ground that sort of is like a control deck and is sort of like not. It's kind of hard to define. The best mid-range deck in the format currently is Boros Monarch. The best mid-range deck, historically, is Jund. It's a deck, I guess, really, if I really had to get down to it, it's a deck that tries to get incremental value over the course of the game until it eventually turns the corner and beats you, which is what this deck is trying to do.
Yeah, where aggro is trying to put on the pressure as soon as possible, and control is trying to stop you from doing stuff that's not running concurrent with its game plan. Midrange tries to advance board state and also, stop the opponent from doing stuff. So it's the sort of deck that plays things like Raven's Crime, where it wants to be able to disrupt the hand. It has removal, but it's also not running 5 creatures that are all 7 drops, like some of the more, I guess I hate to say this, but harder control decks. So it kind of preys upon metagames where aggro and control are both present, or metagames where everything is sort of wide open. And we're kind of in that state with Pauper right now. So I think that midrange is thriving in the form of Boros Monarch, because Boros Monarch can race and interact with Stompy, where Stompy can't really interact back as much. But for the slower decks, it also manages to put a clock on them. So midrange is, we did probably a couple of months ago at this point, actually, that episode about who's the beatdown, and this is the deck. This is the one. This is the type of deck that has to ask that question every single time it plays. It's not like
Right.
What was the example you brought up in that one? Burn versus Stompy.
Yeah, where well, I don't know. Against that very specific matchup, you do have to decide. But yeah, Burn is almost always going to be the beatdown.
Yeah, but
Stompy is almost always going to be the beatdown.
But looking at something like Monarch, that deck always has to make that call of, sometimes it's easy when you see Stompy, you're like, all right, I can race them a little bit, but I also can interact with them in a meaningful way. Whereas against Control, it's like, all right, let's fire some Galv Blasts off real quickly into the face. So I think mid-range is, for me at least, one of the signs that a format has reached a healthy place, because it means that there's diversity. And I guess one of the other ways you could define mid-range, sorry to like bounce all over the place, but it's a deck that's trying to be as 50-50 against stuff as possible. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I certainly think that's fair. I feel like when most people think of quote unquote good interactive Magic, they really are mostly thinking of two mid-range decks sort of slugging it out against each other. And that might not just be me. I'm sure that someone who plays combos is like screaming at me right now. But I think when most people think of healthy formats, that's generally what they consider to be quote unquote healthy.
No, it's interesting that you bring up combo, because if there's one matchup that these sort of decks historically suffer in, it's against combo decks, because they're generally not interacting on the stack as much, and they're more sort of, trying to interact with creatures and interact with your hand. So, a lot of these mid-range decks don't necessarily include blue, and if your opponent's going off with a combo that you can't stop, that kind of makes it a bad time for you. So this list we talked about, this Tortured Existence list, as we talked about numerous times, is trying to sort of, in the early game, interact with the opponent, whether it's a Fume Spitter to kill off small drops early on, or Spore Frogs to stop your opponent's attacks from being meaningful. It just kind of tries to play this game where it interacts with you enough while still developing out its own board state.
Yeah.
So, we've kind of addressed when you want to play mid-range in these metagames where things are more wide open. And obviously, if it's bad against combo, when combo shows up, there weren't exactly a whole ton of mid-range decks running around when Drake was here. And I think that that's kind of the crux of it, isn't it? Just when the format is more wide open and playing fair decks, these decks kind of get a chance to shine.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, struggles against combo decks that are going way too fast for it. It's not really a control deck, So
yeah, it's not a control deck. It just gets to play one on TV sometimes. And personally, I find this sort of Magic very, very engaging. Like mid-range versus mid-range, not even like mid-range mirrors, oftentimes are games of very, very tight inches, where the decision that actually wins and loses the game was made 20 turns ago. And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that sort of stuff to me is really engaging. Like these long games where it's very, very minor advantage, and it's not someone just sitting there counterspelling everything. It's someone going, all right, I'm going to basically say, this is an acceptable loss, this isn't, and hopefully throughout all of this I can somehow deal 20 points of damage to you. But I don't know, how do you feel about this Tortured Existence deck moving forward? Do you think we're going to see a repeat performance from it?
Honestly, no. I think that Tordex is a difficult deck to pilot. I don't think it has the best cards in the format, and I think it's very prone to timing out. So really, big kudos to who did you say took this 5-0? Did we have a name?
I don't actually think I mentioned who got this 5-0. That would be Fartak, Fartak.
All right. Well, kudos to Fartok. I don't think this is an easy deck to pilot. I think you do have to get a little lucky. If Fartok, if you're listening, you're probably a very skilled pilot, and really big kudos to you. But I think that this is going to be a very difficult feat for anyone else to accomplish. One of our good friends on the show is a big Tordex player, and I don't think he's playing Tordex anymore. You know what I mean?
No, he has not been, but he also, has played some subjectively different builds.
This is a 8686 with his Mardu Tordex build that we covered on the show previously.
Now, I do want to toss something out there. How do you feel about splashing blue in this list? Not instead of
you're thinking of playing Muldrifter. I think that's a great idea because when I was thinking about this lick, I was like, the only thing that's missing is really the best mid-range card, which is Muldrifter. I would even be interested if it played Thorn of the Black Rose.
Yeah, some way, because there's 26 creatures in this list. It's not going to have that hard of a time hanging on to Monarch. It also has plenty of removal in the main board in the form of the Crypt Rats and the Fume Spitters. It can interact with the opponent in a way that allows it to not just be dead. Losing the Monarch is the worst thing that can happen to you just by nature of it means your opponent has a Howling Mine. And if you can't get it back quickly, which this deck might not always be in the position to do, it does really, really hurt your game plan. So I kind of like the idea. Additionally, the Muldrifter just gives you a body that is in the air. So it does help keeping the Monarch on your side of the battlefield. And I almost kind of I'm looking at Commune with the Gods and just thinking you could play Forbidden Alchemy there.
Yeah, definitely. And you could stock your graveyard with the cards you want in your graveyard and then get to keep one. I actually don't mind that. It digs less deep, but your card selection is a little bit better, and you can always flash it back later. So if you end up discarding one for you can't discard it with Tordex, but if you end up getting rid of it for whatever reason, you can always just use it again later.
I was going to say, if you hit an alchemy with an alchemy, it's not just a dead
I think
card.
That would be that'd be a very specific case. That's the very specific case.
And if you move into that, it does let you play slightly more silver bullet cards. That Gnawed of the Bone is now something that's more realistic for you to find. And you don't, you're not kind of relying on the fact that, yes, it does have flashback. If I mill this, it's not the end of the world. You can you could maybe include, a soul manipulation or two. What I'm basically proposing here is a midpoint between this and Dimir Alchemy. I'm not sure if it's good at all, but I'd be interested to see a list for something like that, where you're kind of leveraging some of these very powerful mid-range cards, these draw spells, even a bit of counter magic out of the board. Because, swapping out Circle Protection Red for Hydroblasts is not the end of the world. And
yeah, it's pretty good actually. It's not bad. It's not bad.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about stuff like, you've got the Carrion Feeder here. You can evoke a Muldrifter into it and then pop it to the Carrion Feeder before the evoke trigger resolves.
Yeah, also Muldrifter is just insane. It's just insane hard.
Yeah. That said, this is a very rough idea, and we've definitely just been completely ab-libbing this. So,
yeah, I mean the board also has Dead Weight, which is obviously played with the Oromancer. There's another Oromancer in the board. This is definitely packed with so that to take advantage of the Oromancer package. We're just merely suggesting that blue is the best color.
Oh man, coming hot and quick with those controversial opinions tonight, Adrian.
I got the takes, hot takes. Anyone here want to buy my takes? Oh
man, that's that right there is what we refer to as a deep cut. I'll probably put something in the show notes about that.
I'm gonna have to tell everybody about, and I know I'm sidetracking a little here, but this story's pretty funny. I was at a Magic birthday party the other day. Well, I was at a birthday party playing Magic, and I don't remember how it happened, but someone played Seedborn Muse, my girlfriend did, and suddenly now there's this song at work with my Magic friends that just goes Seedborn Musical, Seedborn Musical, and it's supposed to be like this big band like show tune, and I don't know, it's just goofy. I just wanted to share that with everyone.
It's a good story. I appreciate you bringing a little bit of levity into this oh so serious podcast of ours.
At the Seedborn Musical.
Although I feel uncomfortable about a musical acknowledging the fact that it is in fact a musical, but you know.
What that people do that.
Yeah. Doesn't mean I have to like it.
Don't they? Isn't there a musical about being a musical? This has to be a thing.
Is Rent what you're thinking of?
Rent doesn't know it's a musical. Rent's about paying the rent.
All right, we've gotten super far off track at this point. All right, so is there any other points you want to hit about midrange, both in relationship to this deck and just in general, before we kind of wrap things up here?
It's fun, definitely. I think that midrange probably represents like not tier 1, but just out of all the decks that people are playing on a given day. Unless the format is very warped, I would say that most people are playing some kind of mid-range deck, especially in Pauper, where a lot of the brews seem to be mid-range decks. Sure, we have some breakout combos, like we were talking about how good Inside Out combo was before the show, Free from the Real. Like, sure, you do get these glass cannon combos, but most people, when they're brewing in Pauper, they're playing like blue-red mid-range. You know what I mean? So yeah. It's never bad. It's always a good call, and you get a lot of extra value out of your cards. And so, and honestly, like right now, the mid-range decks in Pauper are the Monarch decks. If you like Monarch as an ability, you're playing mid-range when you play that deck. So enjoy it.
And I was listening to a podcast the other day that actually they were talking about aggro decks, and they made a very important point to me. And it's something that I do want to bring up here. The podcast in question is North 100, which is about Canadian Highlander. And they were talking about how saying aggro is a simple game plan is often incorrect. But when you're playing an aggro deck well, you're actually making less decisions because the game is ending quicker. And I think when I was listening to that, I kind of had the realization I like mid-range because I like a lot of decision making, and I like playing a lot of Magic. Like, to me, it's not as satisfying to, end things on turn 4 as it is to, have these intricate battles. So if it's appealing to you to have a game that goes long and has a lot of intricate decision making in it versus games that go shorter and have very important decisions. And I do really want to hammer home, I'm not trying to like crap on aggro players because it's a skill that completely eludes me. But if you're someone who wants to actively make a lot more decisions and see a lot more of your deck every time, I'd recommend give midrange a shot. All right, Adrian, how about you take us on out of this show?
Sure.
Oh, well,
everyone.
Actually,
oh
one
God.
Before you thank everyone, I do want to give a quick little shout out to my local game store. They don't have Pauper events, but I've been having a real good time there. I've been going pretty much every weekend, so I do want to give a shout out to JP Comics out here in Jamaica Plain. It's very.
Is that the place? Is that the place I went to without you? And then, are you going there now?
Yeah. They've got a really solid community. I actually have a lot of fun going there to play Magic. So I've finally found something to fill the void that was left when I moved away from Pat's. But yeah, take us out of the show, Adrian.
Oh, okay. Are we ready? Are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
Well, everyone, thanks for joining us today. This podcast is brought to you by the support of our Patreons. Consider supporting us if you like the show. You can check below this video or the description of this podcast for details on where to find us. We'd like to remind you, if you're listening to this on a platform with reviews, they're always appreciated because they boost our visibility. If you've got a deck list or an idea for a topic, feel free to contact us either via our website, which no one does anymore, or by emailing us directly at commontary@gmail.com. If you're one of our patrons, you can also find us on Discord. Special thanks to Pat's Games, L, who does our theme song, and JP Comics. So next week, this is Adrian and Mike, and we're signing off for Color Commentary.